Pokemon Unite absolutely loves creating characters with crowd control abilities, and I personally think that's a huge problem. So, to investigate this further, I have obviously done some research and some math, because that is what I do. Hello, by the way, my name is Husky, and I am a Pokemon Unite streamer, caster, and content creator who sometimes posts educational content here on YouTube. The first thing I think we need to talk about is what CC actually is, even though if you're watching this video, you probably already know. Just to get everyone on the same page, CC, by definition, are game mechanics that affect the movement, actions, or status of enemy units. And in Pokemon Unite, this could mean a few things. We have Stun, or anything that completely stops an enemy from moving on their own. Slow, or anything that slows down the movement of an enemy. Reduced attack speed, or anything that slows down how fast an enemy can use basic attacks. Or move lock, or anything that stops an enemy from using specific moves or moves in general. Now, these categories have subcategories within them, but of course, to keep it simple, these are the main groupings for the types of CC that we have. And Pokemon Unite developers love creating characters with CC. Now, my buddy Chris and I, no, not that one, we've discussed this at length, so much that he's actually done this part of the analysis for me. There are only 5 Pokemon in the entire game that have 0 form of CC in their entire kit. Can you guess which ones they are? Time's up. They are Sylveon, Inteleon, Scyther, Dragapult, and Leafeon. At the time of this recording, there are 66 Pokemon in the game. That is 92% with some form of built-in CC. Now, of course, some of this CC is not nearly as important as others. The freeze in Glaceon's freeze dry only happens if the enemy stands on it for long enough, and that's hardly anything compared to being picked up and thrown for half your health by Buzzwole, and we'll get to that. But already, that's a lot of CC, setting you up to queue into games where your Ray fight consists of getting surfed, then superpowered, then pulled in by Sandtomb, then slow beamed, all before you could even cast a single move. So the first part of this analysis is going to be talking about all the CC moves in the game. Then we'll group them based on how much they're needed and how impactful they are, and I'll explain more about how I'll do that later. What I'm going to do now is focus only on stuns rather than every type of CC, because many Pokemon have slows included in their moves and even passives. There's also Red Buff, which adds a slow, and some things do stun and slow at the same time. So to keep things a little bit simpler and help me get to my point easier, we'll focus only on stuns, or anything that pushes, knocks up, shoves, throws, keeps you in place, or generally prevents you from using moves. We're going to do this by role, and we'll start with our attackers. On Pokemon Unite's official website, attackers are described as Pokemon that have a low endurance and excel at dealing heavy range damage to opponents. Already that's wrong, but let's base our analysis on that definition. Chandelure, the early move Nightshade, stuns for 1 second after being applied to an enemy or wild Pokemon. Only one of Chandelure's move 2 choices is a stun, which is Imprison, which stuns for 0.7 seconds. Imprison also prevents enemies from using moves while within its zone. It's also worth noting Poltergeist, since it's an AoE slow, or area of effect slow, for 1 second. Cinderace, the only move in Cinderace's kit that has CC is Blaze Kick, which stuns when it hits and gives Cinderace time to attack and do a bunch of damage. Cramorant has multiple stuns. Hurricane stuns for 1 second, throws enemies into the air. Surf stuns for 0.4 seconds and displaces when an enemy is caught in a wave. Dive stuns for 0.5 seconds when it hits an enemy. Decidueye, only Leaf Storm stuns if it hits an enemy at point blank range, otherwise it just pushes them away. Delphox's Fire Spin traps you in a whirlwind of fire for 1 second. Delphox also has some pretty impactful slows within Fire Spin and its Unite move, Fanciful Fireworks, which I know I wasn't going to talk about all the slows, but Fire Spin slows for an entire 4 seconds, and its Unite move is an AoE slow, so it's pretty impactful. Duraludon's Flash Cannon stuns for 1 second after its upgrade. Dragon Tail knocks up enemies, and Stealth Rock slows, and then the longer you stand in it, you can proc a 1 second stun. Finally, Revolving Ruin, the Unite move, was just reworked to shove for 0.5 seconds. Espeon's Psyshock, which I actually wrote Sideshock, now that I'm looking at it, stuns for 1.25 seconds if all of the thingies hit, and Psychic Solaire, the Unite move, also stuns and throws. Gardevoir's Moonblast stuns for 1.2 seconds. 1.2. Psychic doesn't stun, but it slows pretty substantially, so it's worth a quick mention as well. Fairy Singularity, the Unite move, pulls in, stuns, and does a ton of damage on a super low cooldown for some reason. Glaceon's Freeze Dry stuns for 0.6 seconds after they stand in Freeze Dry for 2.5 seconds, and that's all Glaceon CC that it has. The only thing that stuns in Greninja's kit is its Unite move, Water Burst Shuriken, which throws enemies that it hits after the Unite move explodes. Mew's Surf stuns for 1 second total. It shoves for 0.5 seconds, then leaves them unable to act for 0.5 seconds. And then Light Screen also shoves enemies away for 0.5 seconds. Mewtwo Y, that's that thing. Mewtwo Y. Confusion, the early move, stuns for 1 second. Future Sight pushes enemies away from itself and leaves them stunned for 0.5 seconds. Psy Strike throws enemies for 1 second on the final hit. And Infinite Cybern, the Unite move, stuns for 0.6 seconds when it hits an enemy. Miraidon, however, another EX Pokemon that we all know and love, only has one stun within its kit, and that is on the final hit of its Unite move, Bright Future Meteor Storm, and it stuns for 1 second. Alolan Ninetales has an early stun with Icy Wind, where it shoves enemies for a short distance, and Avalanche creates a wall that blocks the enemies, though it doesn't outright stun. Its passive allows it to stun for 1 second if enemies are hit with Avalanche's Snow enough time. So it's more of A9's passive that's stunning in this case. Dazzling Gleam stuns for 0.8 seconds, and then Blizzard, similar to Avalanche, is only going to stun after it's hit with snow a bunch of times, but it shoves enemies back and creates an area of frost against any wall that it hits. Pikachu's Electro Web, one of the early moves, traps enemies for 1.5 seconds. Volt Tackle throws targets for 1.4 seconds, and Thunderbolt stuns enemies for 1.25 seconds. And finally, Venusaur, the boosted attack, pulls enemies between two vines for a little bit of a mini stun, and Sludge Bomb is worth mentioning because it's an AoE slow where it slows for 2 seconds and it's a pretty massive slow. Let us move on to our Speedsters. So according to the Unite website, Speedsters are Pokemon that have high mobility and offense and excel at making quick attacks and scoring points. This description is a bit more correct than our attackers, I think, personally. So Absol's Sucker Punch stuns if an enemy attacks Absol while it's in its counter stance, and it's also worth a mention that Psycho Cut slows by 90% for 2 seconds. Even though it's not a stun, that's still pretty substantial. For Dodrio, Drill Peck shoves enemies hit if the sprint gauge is full, and boy does this one stun for a long time. Jump Kick also briefly stuns if it hits an enemy, and finally, Triple Trample, the Unite move, throws enemies it hits into the air for 1 second. For Gengar, Lick, one of the early moves, drags enemies toward the Ghastly, and Dream Eater sleeps enemies for 1 second, though it exists mainly to combo with Shadow Ball. Meowscarada, the only thing that stuns in Meowscarada's kit is Double Team, where it stuns for 0.8 seconds when Meowscarada hits a Pokemon after it swaps with the Double Team. Talonflame is an interesting one because Fly only stuns on the level 13 upgrade, where it throws enemies in the air for 0.4 seconds. And then its Unite move, Flame Sweep, also stuns, where it shoves all of the enemies, but usually Talonflame just hits a wall, so it doesn't always matter as much. Zeraora is another interesting one, because the only thing with stun in Zera's kit is Slash, which knocks up enemies for 0.5 seconds, but after level 5, it loses that stun, and then it doesn't have any for the rest of the game. Zoroark, with Shadow Claw, it stuns for 0.1 seconds if an enemy is inside the dash, and 0.3 seconds if they are at the end of the dash. So that's the only stun in its kit, but it's usually chained with Feint Attack to get repeated stuns to make sure the Feint Attack can be charged. Alright, so let's move on to our all-rounder. So the definition of an all-rounder are Pokemon that have balanced offense and endurance and are highly tenacious fighters. So now we're getting into the types of Pokemon that probably should have some form of CC so that they can maintain their tenacity. So Aegislash. Aegislash has Sacred Sword that throws enemies for 0.6 seconds. It also has Shadow Claw, which the final hit throws enemies for 0.75 seconds, and Wide Guard stuns twice. It shoves on activation, and then it shoves again at the end for 0.75 seconds. So Azumarill, the early move, Tackle, stuns for 0.5 seconds, Play Rough stuns for 0.75 seconds, and the Unite move, Belly Bash, throws all enemies within the area effect. For Blaziken, this is the Pokemon that's currently either banned or picked competitively. Blaze Kick pushes enemies, and if they hit a wall, they're stunned for 1 second, and then Overheat also shoves when it hits. The perfect amount of CC, honestly. Buzzwole, this stupid thing, I hate it so much. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Fell Stinger stuns for 0.2 seconds. Leech Life restrains an enemy and stuns them for an amount of time dependent on how full the muscle gauge is, and then Superpower grabs and slams an enemy for what feels like a year, and Smackdown hits an enemy also for another year. Ceruledge, our newest Pokemon, has only one stun in its kit, and it's in its Unite move, Revenant Rend, which stuns for 0.7 seconds, so good for them, releasing something that isn't fully depending on stun. Charizard! Oh, Charizard. Finally getting a battle pass. Fire Punch shoves enemies when it lurches forward. Flare Blitz briefly throws a targeted enemy. And I think it's also worth mentioning Fire Blast, which doesn't exactly stun, but it is an AoE slow, once again. Finally, Seismic Slam grabs and brings them into the air for a while, and then slams them on the ground. Dragonite, it's an interesting one because one of its boosted basic attacks stuns if it's an electric type boosted, which stuns for 0.6 seconds. You also have Extreme Speed, which throws the targeted enemy and shoves the others it hits away. And Outrage alternates between those boosted attacks, so technically it's also stuns every 3 attacks and increases its attack speed so that attack comes up faster. And then Draco Impact, the Unite move, throws enemies for 0.5 seconds if it hits. Phalanx's early move Tackle shoves enemies, and then Mega Horn throws enemies into the air for 0.25 seconds. Iron Head stuns if the Phalanx is in no retreat formation, which knocks up enemies for 0.33 seconds. It also stuns in the Dispatch formation, where the returning troopers shove opposing Pokemon they hit. Then No Retreat stuns while switching formations, where enemies are shoved for 0.4 seconds. Garchomp has a good amount of CC in its kit. Dig throws enemies when hit for 0.5 seconds. Dragon Rush drags enemies within a radius, and Dragon Claw pushes enemies and combos for a big dragon stun with Dragon Rush. Livid Outrage, the Unite move, throws all enemies hit with the last attack of the Unite move. Gyarados' Waterfall throws enemies for 0.45 seconds if they're hit with all 3 charges. Bounce throws enemies for 0.45 seconds if the move is charged for long enough, and the Dragon Current Unite move throws enemies for 0.96 seconds if Gyarados remains underwater for at least 2 seconds. Lucario, the boosted attack, throws enemies into the air for 0.5 seconds, and Meteor Mash pushes enemies away. Power Punch stuns the first enemy it hits for 0.5 seconds, and then Bone Rush shoves enemies when throwing the bone. Machamp's Dynamic Punch stuns for 0.5 seconds, and Submission picks up and throws enemies behind itself. Also, the Unite move Barrage Blow shoves all enemies hit for a darn while. Metagross's Zen Headbutt throws an enemy it hits for 0.8 seconds. Magnet Rise stuns for 0.6 seconds when it crashes onto the ground. And Computing Crush, the Unite move, stuns an enemy for 8 seconds if it finds only 1 or 2 enemies in the scan, and then it creates a wall around itself if it finds 3 or more. So, status is happening with Metagross. Mewtwo X's Confusion stuns for 1 second. Future Sight pulls enemies toward itself and leaves them stunned for 0.75 seconds. Psy Strike throws enemies for 1 second on the final hit, and the Unite move Infinite Cyburn stuns for 1 second when it hits an enemy. Mimikyu's Shadow Sneak fears an enemy for 0.25 seconds when Mimikyu jumps to it, which means they try to walk away, so it's basically like a mini stun. And then Play With Me, the Unite move, traps an enemy for 2.8 seconds at most, but it can be less time if the shield is destroyed. Scizzor's Unite move is the only thing with stun in this kit, Red Illusion Drive, where Scizor grabs and pushes the enemies it hits, and if it hits one of the illusions, it's incapacitated for 2 seconds. Serena's Stomp stuns for 0.1 seconds, a little tiny mini stun, but it is a stun, I guess. Since Trap Kick is AoE, it's also worth mentioning that it slows for 1 second while enemies are in it, and Grassy Glide stuns if the second attack hits. Queen Ascendant, the Unite move, picks up an enemy and kicks them to death, which is a pretty decent stun. Tyranitar's early move Bite stuns for 0.6 seconds if the enemy HP is below 50%, and then Dark Pulse does the same exact thing. It stuns for 0.6 seconds if the enemy's below 50% HP. Ancient Power also stuns for 1 second when the Shockwave is released, and then Sand Tomb stuns when it hits an enemy for 1.5 seconds, and then with the second hit, it can pull enemies closer and stun them yet again. Urshifu's early move Headbutt stuns briefly, but it doesn't say how long. Wicked Blow, if you go with the Dark Bear moveset, Wicked Blow shoves enemies who are in the center of the hit, and Throat Chop stuns for 0.7 seconds. If you go with the Rapid Strike build, Surging Strikes throws enemies on the third hit. Finally, the Unite move, Ebon Fist, can either push enemies away or knock them into the air, depending on the way that the move is casted. Zacian, finally, the Quick Attack stuns for 1 second if the move is boosted. Sacred Sword slows for 3 seconds, followed by a 0.2 second stun on the second hit of Sacred Sword. And Play Rough also stuns for 0.7 seconds. Now let's move to our defenders. They're the Pokemon that have high endurance and excel at protecting allies and hindering opponents. Defenders literally have CC in their definition, so these are stuns that should be both highly impactful and also beneficial for the Pokemon's kit. So Blastoise, perhaps the first thing that comes to mind when I think of a Pokemon with a lot of CC is Blastoise. Both of its early moves stun. You have Water Gun, which knocks them back and stuns for 0.5 seconds, and Skull Bash, which also stuns for 0.5 seconds. Hydro Pump is just basically a better Water Gun. It stuns for 0.6 seconds, and then Surf stuns for an entire 1.6 seconds and pushes enemies as well. Finally, Hydro Typhoon. Bummer. Throws enemies into the air for 1.5 seconds. So imagine getting surfed, Hydro Pumped, then Hydro Typhooned in a row, and now you're stunned for 2.7 seconds straight. Cressel's early move, Rock Slide, stuns for 1 second. Rock Tomb doesn't exactly stun, but it prevents enemies from moving when they're hit and basically puts a wall in front of them, so it counts here too. X Scissors stuns 3 times, 0.2 seconds each, and 1.5 seconds on the last hit if the enemy is against a wall. Finally, Rubble Rouser, I hardly know her, stuns for 1 second in an AoE when activated. Goodra's early Tackle throws Pokemon briefly. Later, Power Whip drags Pokemon toward Goodra, who are hit from a distance, and Acid Spray stuns when Goodra dashes toward an enemy who was marked with the first attack of Acid Spray. Also, the slow on it is pretty substantial. Greedent's Covet has a bunch of little micro stuns, since Greedent remains in Covet for 6 seconds and throws enemies every time it runs into them. So it'll get a little mini knock-up every time the Covet runs into an enemy. The Unite move is Berry Belly Flop, which throws enemies into the air if it hits them. Lapras's early Ice Shard freezes enemies for 0.6 seconds, and if the enemy is already frozen, it shoves them a little bit. Bubble Beam picks up Pokemon it hits for 1 second. Ice Beam freezes Pokemon for 1 second, or 1.5 seconds after the move is upgraded if they stand in the Ice Beam for 3 ticks. And Lapras Express, the Unite move, throws Pokemon it hits for 1.5 seconds. Next we have Mamoswine. Ice Shard, the early move, stuns if an enemy is hit by all 3 shards for 0.5 seconds. Tackle also throws enemies into the air for 0.5 seconds. Both of the move 1s, Icicle Crash and Ice Fang, both of them stun. Icicle Crash freezes for 1.5 seconds if Mamoswine shatters the Icicle, and 1 second if it's shattered on its own. Ice Fang picks up and freezes a Pokemon for 1 second, and when it's thrown down, freezes the other enemies in that area for 1.5 seconds. High Horsepower shoves enemies for 0.55 seconds and then leaves them unable to act for 0.35 seconds. Earthquake also stuns for 1.5 seconds on a hit. Finally, the Unite move, Mammoth Mash, throws enemies into the air for 1.5 seconds on the final hit. So literally every single thing in Mamo's kit has a stun. Slowbro's Scald is worth mentioning, even though it doesn't stun. It slows for a total of 3.5 seconds on a direct hit. Surf stuns for 0.4 seconds on the first hit of the wave, and 0.75 on the upgrade. Also on the upgrade, the second wave knocks enemies back as well. Telekinesis stuns for 2.3 seconds by raising enemies into the air, and finally Slow Beam stuns for an entire 3 seconds. Snorlax's Tackle throws enemies for 1 second, Heavy Slam stuns and throws for 1 second, Block pushes enemies and stuns them for 0.45 seconds, which can occur a maximum of 4 times per block. Yawn puts enemies to sleep for 3 seconds, and Power Nap throws enemies into the air on the first hit for 1 second, and it can stun for another 1 second when the move is reactivated. Trevenant's Woodhammer stuns twice, but for different amounts of time depending on how much HP Trevenant has left. The first hit stuns for 0.5 seconds, and the second can stun up to an additional 1.5 seconds if the tree is below 40% HP. Hornleech also shoves enemies for a year, and the Unite move, Phantom Force, throws enemies for 0.42 seconds. Umbreon, the last defender that we have, Mean Look, though it doesn't prevent an enemy from using any moves, it traps them inside a zone for 2 seconds, so it's still kind of dumb. Also, when it's upgraded, it lasts for 3.5 seconds. That's crazy. Foul Play's second hit stuns and shoves for 1 second. Snarl stuns for 0.7 seconds after the move ends, and Moonlight Prance stuns for 1 second when Umbreon lands. Finally, our supporters. Supporters are Pokemon that provide team support by inflicting status conditions on opponents and by healing allies. Blissey's Egg Bomb stuns and tosses enemies for 0.8 seconds, and it somehow secures every Rayquaza ever. Bliss Assistance, the Unite move, knocks up any enemy it hits for 0.8 seconds. Clefable, perhaps one of the most insane stuns, Gravity, stuns for 1 second when an enemy dashes into the zone. And Follow Me also draws enemies in and forces them to auto-attack Clefable. The Wonder Wish Unite move also has some moves that stun, like Hydro Pump and Block, but these are the exact same as the other Pokemon that I've already talked about, so I don't really need to go over these again. Next is Comfey, that silly thing. Sweet Kiss draws enemies in when charged. Magical Leaf stuns for 0.5 seconds after 6 leaves hit, and Grass Knot roots a Pokemon it hits, and then if it hits 2 enemies, it pulls the second one to the location of the first. Eldegoss's Cotton Spore stuns after the move ends and throws enemies into the air for 0.5 seconds. Also, the Unite move, Cotton Cloud Crash, shoves enemies away after it lands for 0.7 seconds. Hoopa's Astonish is a great early secure move where it stuns for 0.75 seconds. Phantom Force shoves enemies away from Hoopa, and Shadow Ball stuns if Hoopa hits a marked enemy with a boosted attack within 4 seconds, and stuns immediately if a trick-linked ally's Shadow Ball also hits the same enemy. Finally, Rings Unbound changes Hoopa's moves where Hyperspace Fury stuns for 1 second. Next we have Mr. Mime. The boosted attack throws enemies for 0.5 seconds. Fake Out knocks back enemies for 0.4 seconds. And Light Screen shoves enemies for 0.5 seconds. Then we have Confusion, which stuns enemies for 1.5 seconds if they're hit into a wall. Psychic stuns for 1 second on the final hit. Barrier shoves and stuns enemies for 0.5 seconds. And the Unite move stuns enemies for 0.5 seconds on every hit, and the last hit stuns for 1 second. Next is Sableye. Its boosted auto fears enemies for 1 second. Thief stuns for 0.5 seconds if the enemy hit doesn't have any Aeos energy. Otherwise, it just takes the Aeos energy. Knockoff stuns for 0.4 seconds or 0.6 if they don't have Aeos energy on the first hit, and then it pushes them away and leaves them stunned for another 0.6 seconds or 1 second if they don't have any Aeos energy. Confuse Ray confuses enemies for 2 seconds. It's also worth mentioning the slow on Feint Attack is pretty substantial, which also helps with all the stunning that Sableye does. Finally, the Unite move, Chaos Glower, stuns for 3 seconds, and if it's interrupted before the enemy is returned to base, it stuns for another 1.5 seconds. Finally, Wigglytuff. The boosted auto attack stuns for 0.5 seconds. Why? I have no idea. Defense Curl throws enemies for 0.5 seconds. Rollout throws enemies for 0.5 seconds on each hit, but obviously it has an option to hit more than once if an enemy is caught between a wall or something. And on upgrade at level 12, the stun increases to 0.7 seconds. Also, Sing sleeps Pokemon for 1.5 seconds and 1.57 seconds on upgrade. I've talked about all these forms of stun, so now we're going to look at this chart that I've made, and we're going to help categorize it. So we need to understand how impactful and crucial these are, and we're going to use those role definitions that I talked about earlier to help build that out. You'll see this on double time here, sped up, me putting all of these Pokemon on an axis, and what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the Pokemon's most impactful stun move in their kit, and not their Unite move, unless the Unite move is the only stun they have. So for example, when I'm ranking Espeon, I'm focusing on Psyshock, and when I'm ranking Mamoswine, I'm focusing on Ice Fang and Icicle Crash. And you'll also see me start disagreeing with myself at important points, but the general gist here is that based on what the roles of these Pokemon are supposed to do, these following things are true. Attackers shouldn't have these high-impact stuns. Their job is to deal damage from range, so a little something like Venusaur's boosted attack makes sense, but something that places you in a whirlwind for fire for a year is not what an attacker should specialize in. Speedsters are doing alright. They often require combos that need some sort of stun to help them finish the combo and get their full burst in, so for the most part, the only one I have a problem with is Dodrio, whose Drill Peck shouldn't be stunning for as long as it does, especially with so much other CC in the game. All-rounders need a bit of something since they're melee like speedsters, but it shouldn't be as insane as it is for some of them like Buzzwole and Tyranitar. A Garchomp combo that isolates one opponent and can help him build his boosted but won't kill an opponent in a single hit makes sense. Defenders are the class that needs CC, and most of them have it pretty good, but if you want something to have a lot of stun and disruption in this game, it has to be in this class. Since Pokemon like Mamo and Snorlax aren't supposed to do a ton of damage, they need to help displace the opponents for the strong attackers to be able to do the damage. Finally, supports are a weird class. They should have some sort of hindrance thing, like a Cotton Spore or an Egg Bomb, but things like Mr. Mime and Wigglytuff are just doing way too much CC for their class. These should be classified under Defender if the stuns they have are actually supposed to be there. In Sableye, this is just a tilting design. I don't even know what you do with it, but it just does a lot of stunning. Hearing about being stunned constantly may make you think that Unite just doesn't want to allow you to play the game, but that's not true. Unite has some built-in features that will allow you to counter some of this CC, one of which is the full heal. It got nerfed? It only lasts for 1.5 seconds? Alright, don't worry, there's more. There are a lot of emblems that can give you hindrance resistance, which those are useless? Okay, well, don't worry, there's more. There are some specific Pokemon with hindrance resistance or unstoppable built into their kits, so I guess if you're interested in countering CC, you kind of just have to pick one of those. Even then, you'll still spend a lot of time stunned or slowed or whatever. Now, another thing that we can't continue without talking about is that there are no measures in place to avoid chain CC. Chain CC occurs when multiple CC moves are placed on a character at once and all of them activate for the duration that they're programmed to activate. What this means is that if certain moves are pressed one after the other, you can be CC'd and unable to play the game for an insane amount of time. So now what? I'm going to go back through each Pokemon and factor in the current most played build. Then I'll go back to our little chart, equalize the impact factor of these Pokemon's stuns based on how often an impactful stun move is likely to appear if that Pokemon is played. Then we'll look at the win rate of all these movesets and determine the overall impact of the Pokemon with respect to the stun in their kit to generate a finalized understanding of how meaningful the stun really is. Does that make sense? Honestly, it barely makes sense to me. So what I did was I recorded the win rates and pick rates overall and the win and pick rates of the most played builds. Now, all of this is subject to change week to week, but I think this analysis will help us contextualize this a little bit better. Our chart now looks like this, with the x-axis changing to represent how likely the Pokemon is to appear in a game, and the y-axis now represents the most used build of that Pokemon and whether that build is an impactful CC build as determined in our previous ranking. Looking at this chart, we notice that there are a lot of Pokemon that are likely to appear in any given match that don't require any CC, or at least a lot of CC. This is actually our most populated quadrant. Basically, this tells us that CC moves aren't the thing that's attracting players to play specific Pokemon. In fact, the roles kind of end up equalizing out here. Attackers and speedsters aren't often played with a ton of CC, and defenders are. Let's be more specific here and take our heavy CC Pokemon that are likely to appear in games and see how impactful they are based on their most common moveset's win rate. So we're focusing on our upper quadrant. So Slowbro uses its less stun-heavy moveset more often. It uses Scald and Amnesia, but Scald still heavily slows. Right now, it has a 51.71% win rate. Blaziken obviously switches between moves throughout the game, so it doesn't really have a more popular moveset, but it's currently at a win rate of 50.98%. Trevenant uses the Woodhammer Hornleech build more with a 51.24% win rate. Umbreon uses Mean Look Wish most often with a 48.6% win rate. Pikachu uses Volt Tackle Electro Ball most with a 48.66% win rate. Phalanx uses Iron Head and No Retreat with a 57.6% win rate. Blissey uses Soft Boiled and Egg Bomb with a 50.29% win rate. Comfey uses Flora Healing Magical Leaf with a 46.55% win rate. Mr. Mime uses Psychic and Power Slap mostly, so not its main CC moveset, but it has a 50.68% win rate. Mamoswine uses Ice Fang and Earthquake with a 50.91% win rate. Crustle uses Rock Tomb and X Scissor with a 51.37% win rate. Alolan Ninetales uses Blizzard Avalanche with a 48.75% win rate. Lucario uses E-Speed and Bone Rush most often with a 49.68% win rate. Garchomp uses the Dragon moveset with a 52.3% win rate. And Metagross uses Gyro Ball and Magnet Rise for a 50.35% win rate. 10 out of 15 of these Pokemon have above a 50% win rate, meaning we can say that they win their games with these heavy CC moves most of the time. That is 66.7% of CC-heavy Pokemon that are likely to appear in games are also more likely to win these games. If we go back to our overall win rates that I recorded for the current week, only 26 out of the 66 total Pokemon have above a 50% win rate. that means only 39% of Pokemon are usually winning more games than they are losing. Right now, that means that we can say that popular Pokemon with a lot of stuns are more likely to win games than the overall roster. However, when we factor in our heavy CC mons that are less likely to appear in games, so our other upper quadrant, the upper left one, only 15 out of 34 of these have above a 50% win rate, which is only 44%. However, that's still more than the total roster who have above a 50% win rate, but that's not impressive as the 66.7 that I mentioned earlier. Basically, all of these numbers mean that Pokemon with CC heavy moves tend to be more likely than non-CC heavy Pokemon to have a positive win rate, and that's not a statistic to scoff at. Just for fun, let's do an example, assuming that the top 10 most picked Pokemon for this current week, which is July 7th, as I'm filming this, and let's assume that they're playing in a game against each other. So let's say Team 1 is Trevenant, Sylveon, Umbreon, Absol, and Eldegoss, and Team 2 is Slowbro, Mimikyu, Blaziken, Pikachu, and Venusaur. Imagine the final Ray fight where we could see the following combination of stuns. Team 1 stun. Umbreon mean looks immediately into a Trevenant Woodhammer, both of which obviously hit. Umbreon then Unite moves, dropping down and stunning for another second, right into a Trevenant Hornleech. If you're not dead already, Trevenant also has the Unite move to spare, and while trying to escape, here comes Absol with a big Sucker Punch to stun you in place and hit you with the Unite move. If we add up that amount of time, an enemy could be CC'd for 11 seconds. And it didn't even include the possibility for Cotton Cloud Crash either. I honestly completely forgot about Eldegoss. Without even worrying about a Cotton Cloud Crash, you are stunned for 11 seconds, which is 1.8% of the entire game. Now let's look at our other team. Blaziken starts by shoving an enemy into a wall, following up with a huge burst of damage from Overheat. Pikachu then jumps in with a Volt Tackle, followed by a Slowbro Scald, then Mimikyu hops on top with a Unite move, and if the enemy isn't finished off yet, here comes Slowbro with the Slow Beam. So an enemy, in total, could be CC'd for an entire 11.7 seconds if all of these moves effects are maximized. That is 2% of the entire game. And that's just one Ray fight example. So let's take Trevenant on its own, who with a combination of Woodhammer, Hornleech, Unite move, can stun enemies for 7 seconds straight. Assuming a Trevenant can Unite move 3 times in a game, that's already 21 seconds of stun if this exact combination is followed. If we do some more math and consider how many times Trevenant may be able to use the Woodhammer Hornleech combo without the Unite move available, which would be a total of a 5-second stun, since we're taking that Unite move out, we have to assume a few more things. So let's assume Trevenant reaches level 7 when it unlocks Hornleech at 7 minutes. We also should assume that Trevenant uses this combo exactly correctly every 9 seconds, which is the length of the move's cooldown. So with 7 minutes left in the game, or 420 seconds, theoretically Trevenant could use this combination 46 times. So then we have to subtract the 3 times they already included where the Unite move is used, so we have 43 times of that combination, times 5 seconds, giving us 215 seconds of stun without the Unite move. We can then add the 21 seconds I calculated before, and we have a total of 236 seconds that Trevenant can theoretically stun one enemy. That is almost 40% of the entire game. And that's assuming it doesn't hit with Woodhammer at all until it reaches level 7. 40% of the game. Obviously, this is not feasible considering how much of the game involves farming and etc. And you're not going to hit everything. So let's say there's a really good Trevenant player that can combo you 15 times in a game. So I said that theoretically it could be 46. So let's say 15, being generous. Trevenant can combo Woodhammer, Hornleech 15 times in one game. And let's include the 3 Unite move uses. So that would be 81 total seconds. That is still over a minute that you're stunned, or 13.5% of the game. And that's one single Pokemon. What if they have a Slowbro or a Phalanx or a Volt Tackle Pikachu running around? And we know that's possible considering how often these Pokemon are currently being picked. So I guess the other question remains, is this a reasonable amount of time to be stunned? So even though so many Pokemon are being played that don't have a ton of CC built into their kit, even a single Pokemon can keep you from playing the game for over 10% of it. Also, we showed that Pokemon with a lot of CC are more likely to win games, especially if they're popular picks, so these stunts are indeed making an impact. I want to know your thoughts. Are these stuns needed? Why are attackers getting stunned? Why is Sableye even allowed? Please let me cast at Worlds. Who's a good boy? Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!